So thank you. First of all, let me tell you how excited I am to be here. It's not exactly what I expected to be a year ago. I'm an IT professional, been so for 15 years, and I decided to take on a new challenge. So I started with the Security and Network Engineering Master's Program of the University of Amsterdam. Talk about navigating the unexplored there. Part of this program is doing a research project, and I did mine with the Dutch NREN SURF. So it's an honor to be here, both as a student and as a not-so-young professional. But that's enough about me. Let's talk about the current state of multi-factor authentication between GÉANT federations. Using two-factor authentication is something that greatly improves our digital security, and I really hope you use it whenever possible. But let me tell you, there is room for improvement. So let's move on to the context of my research. Within GÉANT, teachers and students can use their university account to access all kinds of digital services. This is called federated authentication. So how does it work? On the left, within GÉANT, we have the identity providers, and they hold your account, so for example, your university. And on the right, we have the service provider delivering any kind of digital service. And the remarkable thing is that when using a service from another country, from another federation, the use of two-factor authentication is not very common. So in this example, where I want to use a service from another country, which is step one, the service provider checks my identity with my identity provider, which is step two. And in doing so, it can specify how it wants to authenticate. But in most cases, the service provider actually does not specify anything, and it lets the identity provider decide, which then, in most cases, defaults to using username password, which is not exactly safe. So, and why does it not ask for something stronger? Well, because the service provider does not know if the identity provider supports it. So it does not know what will happen if it asks for, say, two-factor authentication. This is basically also a chicken-egg problem, because since the service provider does not know what the identity provider supports, it does not ask for it. And on the other hand, since the identity provider does not get any requests for it, they don't implement it. So how can we break this cycle? And that's exactly what SURF asked me to look into. How can we improve the use of two-factor authentication between federations? So what I did was basically write an automated script using SAML, pretend to be a well-known service provider, and just start knocking on the doors of all the 4,500 identity providers within GÉANT. And each time present them with a different kind of authentication and store the results and see what happens. So when we look at the results for using two-factor authentication specifically, most of them show me a login page, which actually can mean two things. Either they support it or they just ignore my request, which is another problem. The other half, roughly, they refuse me, which is the way it should be. If you don't support it, you should say that to us. But it means an error on the screen of the user, so he has to try something else. Next thing I tried was to use an ordered list and present it to the identity provider with two-factor authentication on top, among other options, and basically let the identity provider choose whatever it thinks, whatever it supports and is the strongest. When we look at those results, it's actually a lot better from the user's perspective, because I only get login page and no error screens. And this is because the identity provider just sees something on the list it supports and then it chooses it. So what have we seen? That when asking for two-factor authentication specifically, support is not so good yet. But when you use it on a list, among other options, it's actually supported well by the identity providers of GÉANT, which means that that actually clears the way to start upgrading to two-factor authentication, because if the service providers start presenting lists and put two-factor authentication on the options, and then the identity providers can start implementing it, and the transition for the user will be smooth. That's the point. As a future research, I would really like to refine these results more, and maybe together with identity provider and the service provider start logging in to see what actually happens. But most importantly, and that's actually a call to action, is that the NREN admins start discussing their policies and start implementing two-factor authentication this way. Because my research showed there is no technical barrier for taking that next step. Thank you.